Good evening.
Thank you to the New Britain NAACP. Thank you to Mr. Ronald Davis, the president, who's so ably leading this branch, to the executive board of this branch, to all who work to make this dinner happen tonight. Everyone gathered here this evening, good evening. I want to first join in congratulating the 25 incredible honorees. Congratulations to each and every one of you for the service that you bring to the New Britain community. I do bring you greetings from your neighbors down the road in New Haven, where I'm a member of the Greater New Haven branch of the NAACP under the leadership of my friend Doris Dumas. And I also want to acknowledge my partner in life, my husband, who's traveled with me. Where did he go? Oh, he moved on me. Kevin Walton. Kevin has his own NAACP credentials. He has served for many years as the advisor to the Youth Council of the Greater New Haven NAACP. We have raised our sons in the NAACP. They each have had their chance to serve as the president of the Youth Council while they were there, and they're now both on college campuses and members of college branches. The NAACP holds really special meaning to us, to our family, and so with that, I'm honored to be with you here tonight. I did have a chance to speak with Mr. Davis in preparing for tonight, and he gave me a few words of advice to, first of all, was to stick to the theme, so defeat hate and vote. And second, he let me know that y'all don't want to be here all night long. All right, so be brief but inspiring. So true to that, I will try to both be thematic, brief, and give you something to think about tonight. So to our theme. Defeat hate and vote. Defeat hate, vote. Hate. What a powerful word. Hate. Intense, passionate dislike. Synonymous with loathing, detestation, hostility, contempt, repugnance. Defeat hate. As people of color in these United States, it's difficult to honestly face the history of this country without coming face to face with hundreds of years of hate directed at people of color. While history books attempt to whitewash the version of history and often relegate our story to brief mentions and language that intentionally offers our students diluted versions of our history, seeking to prevent them from learning and analyzing the true brutality, inhumanity, and yes, hate that are the hallmarks of United States history, we know the truth will not be hidden. The roots of hate in this country, try as one might to hide them, bore and continue to bear fruit of a tree poisoned by hate. Hate, mixed with dominance, led to the extermination of the native people in our land. Hate mixed with greed led to the enslavement of millions of Africans as we were stolen from the African continent. Hate mixed with power led to the machinations this country's founding fathers went through to craft a powerful Declaration of Independence, Federalist Papers, and Constitution that defined Africans as a percent of the value of a white man. Hate mixed with control led to the deep divide in this country that was the brutal Civil War. Hate mixed with regret leads to the continued worship of the Confederate flag in vast sections of this country today. Hate mixed with revenge led to the systematic dismantling of the gains that were made during Reconstruction. Hate mixed with envy led to the destruction of black wealth in Oklahoma's Black Wall Street. Hate mixed with fear led to Jim Crow and segregation. Hate mixed with mob mentality led to lynchings of thousands of blacks at gatherings where whites gathered and carried on with a party-like atmosphere. Hate mixed with ignorance led to mobs of angry whites screaming at little black children seeking to be the first to integrate a school in the 50s. Hate mixed with state power led to the use of police dogs, and water hoses to mercilessly beat men, women, and college students, teens, and children in anti-segregation marches. Hate mixed with law led to Rosa Parks' arrest for not moving to the back of the bus. Hate mixed with public policy led to disenfranchisement, poll taxes, and literacy tests that kept blacks from the ballot box. Hate mixed with isolationism led to redlining, segregated suburban development, white flight, and discriminatory housing policies. Hate mixed with fear of black success led to a backlash against affirmative action policies. Hate mixed with legislative power led to systems of mass incarceration, criminalization of poverty, and the criminalization of blackness. Hate mixed with police power led to police brutality, state-sanctioned murder, and acquittals of racist cops. Hate mixed with homophobia led to assaults on gay Americans, discriminatory practices against the trans community, and resistance to gay marriage. Hate mixed with xenophobia led to anti-immigration policies and the separation of children at the border. Hate mixed with male dominance led to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. Hate mixed with a black president led to senators who disrupt presidential speeches yelling, "No, you lie," pledges to block every effort initiated, the birther movement, and the surfacing of thinly veiled prejudices. Hate mixed with 8 years of an Obama presidency, excellence in the White House, and an American family worthy of praise led to the election of a misogynistic, racist, xenophobic, sexist, alleged rapist, tax evasionist, Russian colluding president. Hate mixed with an angry white mobs led to Charlottesville. Hate mixed with disaffected white teens leads to school shootings and movie theater shootings. And hate mixed with intrinsic bias leads to daily microaggressions. Hate is foundational to the story of this country. And facing such an incredible onslaught of hateful action, many reactions are expected and should be anticipated. James Baldwin reminds us that to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. How could we not feel rage? The litany I reviewed is but a sampling, a smattering of the daily injustices faced by our parents and grandparents and their parents and grandparents. And unfortunately, it is a sampling of what we continue to experience today and what our children and grandchildren, and unless we right this ship, it is what their children and grandchildren will experience too. Miraculously, though, in the face of such hate, our communal response to hate and the many ways it's manifest has historically not been a rageful response. Yes, there are moments when the fury boils to a point that it cannot be contained and does get expressed in anger, in outrage, in protest, in riot. But like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without at the same time condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. The words of Dr. Martin Luther King. And while I understand the anger of Watts in Detroit and Baltimore, I understand the anger of Ferguson, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Bridgeport, I have to note both that the anger seen there is not the typical response we've seen to what have been 400 years of intolerable circumstances, and that when riots have occurred, the end of the riot has most often led to continued efforts to confront hate in varied ways. And so I contend we have a long history from which to draw upon that reflects how we have, in fact, defeated hate. For each expression of hate I know, we, citizens of the United States of all backgrounds, races, colors, and creed, have been called upon to defeat hate. We endured 246 years of American slavery systems, a system enshrined in law, custom, and culture, a system so natural to those in control at the time that the thought of anything else seemed foreign and inconceivable. A system stealthily defeated from within by innumerable acts of sabotage, infiltration, Tubman-like insurrection, Douglas-like oration, and from without, through courageous abolitionists that won over hearts and minds, withstood threats of sedition, Civil War agitation, Lincoln's proclamation, and more that led to the defeat of the system of human chattel-like slavery. We endured 89 years of legal segregation that relegated our communities and institutions as separate but equal, but never truly equal. They offered separate public accommodations for drinking water, public restrooms, seats on buses and trains and lunch counters, schools and educational institutions, jobs that others wouldn't perform, denied the right to vote. And yet when many were afraid to challenge the system, thought King and Malcolm and Rustin were fools. Others came together and despite violence, threats, murder, assault, lynching, arrest and imprisonment, loss of jobs, arson of homes, men, women, college students, teens, and children joined in march, sat in, wrote, spoke, protested, marched, registered, Freedom Road, faced the Klan, endured water hoses and police dogs, lobbied leadership, proposed policies, enacted laws, and changed this country. Hate was defeated. The trifecta of civil rights passed, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the 1968 Fair Housing Act, all served to codify in law the protections promised in the founding documents of this nation were meant to embrace more than just white, male, hetero-oriented citizens. And now we stand, 64 years post-Brown versus the Board of Education, living among relatives and community members who remember segregated schools, who remember little Ruby Bridges, who remember the hate that good white citizens espoused at the thought of a black child sharing the classroom with their 8-year-old black or brown child. And we know that legal segregation of schools was struck down because some brave souls dared to face hate, challenge the laws of a court system that was stacked against them, with the support of astute NAACPers like Thurgood Marshall, dared to bring a case to the highest court in the land and defeated hate at the highest levels. We have seen hate defeated. We have dared to dream dreams that no one thought possible. We have imagined a world no one could see. We have challenged the powerful, the privileged, the entitled. We have fought for our seat at the table. And as dear unbossed and unbought Shirley Chisholm encouraged, we brought our folding chair when a seat wasn't available. We came to understand early that the system wasn't designed for us, but that we could make that very system have to expand to include us. We could defeat hate, and we have over and over and over again. It's important to remember that here in 2018, as we again confront the same kind of hate confronted in 1650, in 1776, in 1865, in 1954, in 1965, in 2016. And I believe we will continue to experience hate and confront hate and defeat hate until we ultimately cure the very disease that sickens the soul of this country for good. The systems we're talking about are systems that were designed for a purpose. Fed by hate, fed by fear of other, fed by the desire for power and control, fed by false narratives of male dominance and white supremacy, narratives that are powerful and ubiquitous, but narratives that are in fact false. History is distorted and kept from us out of the fear that the true fake news would be discovered. Not the fake news that 45 speaks of, but the true fake news that has existed since colonists began conquering black and brown bodies and stealing their land, resources, and land. And so we must grapple with the fact that systems are set up to maintain the false narrative. As Michael Eric Dyson says, we must recognize that politics and the state exist to defend white interests and identities, that witness is an important means to express black grievance and resistance and to shape public policy, that dormant and resurgent white bigotry, even at the highest level of government, must be identified and opposed, that new politics must be formed to fulfill a true democracy. Baldwin reminds us the state was doing exactly what it was set up to do, undermine blackness. And Michael Eric Dyson tells us that white supremacist culture conspires such that its privileges have been rendered normal, its perspectives natural, its biases neutral, its ideas superior, its anger wholly justifiable, and its way of being the gift of God to the universe. This narrative places others in a position of lesser becomes other, others become the target of hate, the reason for fear, and Dyson reminds us that the other is the fuel that drives ideas of American society, that feeds American identity. There are many examples throughout history of how groups have been made the other. Most powerfully, perhaps, has been Black America. But othering is not restricted to those of African descent. The system has othered the poor, the immigrant, women, the formerly incarcerated, the LGBTQ community, the disabled, the English language learner, and on and on and on. According to Baldwin, most often America was split in two, not between North and South, but between the powerful and the disenfranchised. Racism, the scourge that beclouded our democracy, remained and remains the nation's greatest peril. But the powerful maintain the status quo by sowing discord among the disenfranchised. Poor white folk, rather than uniting with their socio-economically oppressed brothers and sisters against the rich, trained their ire on poor black folk. They channeled their anxieties into a vengeance against blackness. In 1960, President Lyndon B. Johnson said, if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. Michael Eric Dyson notes that Baldwin predicted the forces that would one day lead to the return of xenophobic white nationalism or to the rise of Donald Trump. The powerful will always seek to silence, trying to achieve the nation's redemption on the cheap, not through self-correction, but through crimson-stained violence that sacrifices the other, whether black or brown or queer or immigrant. And hate and fear become inextricably linked. And we must deal with both. Dyson says in his book, What Truth Sounds Like, that this process of developing an understanding of white hate, he says, I was only starting to sense that white folk might have feared us as much as they don't like us. It seemed vaguely tied to how we refused to bow in the face of suffering, and how despite their doing the worst they could imagine doing to us, we refused to give in. We refused to give in. We refuse to give in. We have defeated hate time and time again, and I believe that we again will refuse to give in. It is our legacy. It is what we owe to those who came before us. Times today are awful. There's a man in the White House who has defiled the office. His vulgarity, his mocking of others, his lies, his embracing of white supremacists, his misogyny, harassment, and racism has no place in the highest office in this land. Causes us to bemoan these facts, to believe that these are the end of times. It leads us to think that things can't get any worse, and then he says or does something else that threatens the economic stability of the middle class, that eviscerates the safety net of the poor, disabled, or elderly, that angers our allies, that empowers those who wish this country ill. He elevates the worst citizens to positions of power and tokenizes a few people of color. He creates policies that have long-lasting impact on women's autonomy over their bodies or our civil rights protections. We face the hate, and with those checks and balances that are supposed to protect us seeming to fail at every turn, we may even feel hopeless in the face of hate. But my friends, then we must be reminded that time and time again we have defeated hate. We owe it to Sojourner and Harriet, to Frederick Douglass and every Civil War soldier who fought for the Union, to W.E.B. and Booker T. We owe it to Rosa and Ruby, to Malcolm and Martin, to John Lewis and Jerome Smith, to Ella Baker and Dorothy I. Height, to Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan, to Medgar and Murley, to Ruby Sales and Jonathan Daniels, to Thurgood Marshall and Pauli Murray, to every person, those whose names we know and those whose names we may never know. We owe it to them to continue to defeat hate. It's our legacy to rise under pressure, to remember that they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. I'm reminded of a wonderful story about a young woman who went to her mother and told her about her life and how things were so bad for her. She didn't know how she was going to make it, and she wanted to give up. She was tired of fighting and struggling. It seemed as one problem was solved, a new one arose. Her mother took her to the kitchen. She filled 3 pots with water and placed each on a high fire. Soon the pots came to a boil. In the first she placed carrots. In the second she placed eggs. And in the third she placed ground coffee beans. She let them sit and boil without saying a word. In about 20 minutes she turned off the burners. She fished out the carrots, the eggs, and the coffee. She turned to her daughter and said, "Tell me what you see." "Carrots, eggs, and coffee," she said. Her mother brought her closer and asked her to feel the carrots. She did and noticed they were soft. Her mother asked her to take the egg and break it, and after pulling off the shell, she observed the hard-boiled egg. Finally, the mother asked the daughter to sip the coffee. She smiled as she tasted its richness and savored the aroma. The daughter asked, "What does it mean, Mother?" Her mother explained that each of these objects had faced the same adversity, boiling water, but each reacted differently. The carrot went in strong, hard, and unrelenting. However, after being subjected to boiling water, it softened and became weak. The egg had been fragile. Its thin outer shell had protected its liquid interior, but after sitting through the boiling water, its inside became hardened. And the ground coffee beans were unique, however. And they were in the boiling water. They had changed the water. Which are you, she asked her daughter. When adversity knocks on your door, how do you respond? Are you a carrot, an egg, or a coffee bean? Think of this. Which am I? Am I the carrot that seems strong, but with pain and adversity do I wilt and become soft and lose my strength? Am I the egg that starts with a malleable heart but changes with the heat? Did I have a fluid spirit, but after a death, a breakup, a financial hardship, or hate of some kind, have I become hardened and stiff? Does my shell look the same, but on the inside I'm bitter and tough with a stiff spirit and a hardened heart? Or am I like the coffee bean? The bean actually changes the hot water, the very circumstance that brings the pain. When the water gets hot, it releases the fragrance and flavor. If you are like the bean, when things are at their worst, you become even better. You change the situation around you. I believe historically, my friends, as a people, we have been the coffee. Like the coffee beans, we have been ground and steeped in the hottest waters believable. We have come out richer, stronger, more aromatic, and we have changed the very water around us. We have looked hate in the face and said, bring it on. We have prayed and sang. We have marched and protested, gotten weary and re-energized, been angry and mournful, disorganized and organized, soulless and soulful. We have taken America's best shot and stood to rise again. We have defeated hate. And today we are facing such hate. We are under incredible pressures that would threaten to break a lesser people. But we will defeat this hate too. We will not only survive, but we have the power to thrive and be more than transformed. We have the power to transmute this nation into the nation that we dream it to be. Some of the most powerful things are formed under pressure. There'd be no diamond if the coal didn't withstand the pressure. There'd be no olive oil if olives avoided the press. No flowers would bloom if seeds avoided the darkness. No wine if the grapes refused to be stomped. Should it be this way? No. Ideally, no. But are we built for it? Absolutely. We have to keep moving forward. As Harriet Tubman implored her charges on the escape to freedom, if you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop, keep going. If you want a taste of freedom, keep going. And so I address this crowd of powerful New Britain NAACPers. I am reminded that the end of the theme tonight is vote. Defeat hate and vote. I can't imagine in a gathering such as this that there are any among us who do not know the power and the value of the vote. Everyone of voting age and with their voting rights intact, I believe, will be at the polls on November 6th, casting your own ballot and using the rest of the day, encouraging and assisting others to get to the polls. So knowing that, what I will close with today is not simply vote, but vote for what? Some of us have spent so many days voting for candidates who have promised the world and things never seem to change. I contend we need to be supporting and voting for transformational change. Change the challenges, the very core beliefs we have built, and sustain the systems of inequality to this day. You see, someone once said we earn the politicians we deserve, inherit the systems we admire, and find useful no matter our protests to the contrary. Another tells us your system, any system, is perfectly designed to produce the result you are obtaining. If we aren't getting the results we want, we must change the system. We find ourselves dealing with political parties and politicians that often seem to forget our issues after Election Day, or sacrifice them in the name of compromise. Hence the dilemma black voters perpetually face: how to effectively argue for their just reward for loyalty to a party that often takes them for granted while keeping its eye on the disaffected white voter who might potentially bail in resentment of a few benefits offered to black folk. Minneapolis City Council member Andrea Jenkins, the first openly transgender woman elected to public office in the United States, tells us that at this particular moment in history, and with this democratic structure that we set up, the role of politician, and even more specifically of the black politician, is to harness the power of all the activism that's happening and make policies to address it. because it's amazing to lay out on the freeway and stop traffic, but this does not necessarily create change. It creates the opportunity for change, but that can't be our only tactic. We've got to use the electoral process to make the changes that address the challenges that people are bringing forward. I believe racist and xenophobic figures were only portrayed as out of step once civil rights leaders and other black activists challenged their politics and the society that would elect them. It's our activism that challenges the powers that be to change, adapt, transform, and step toward equality. So how can we use the power of our vote to defeat hate? We need to vote today for Patrick Harmon, Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Sandra Bland, Anthony Hill, Samuel DuBois, Brendan Glenn, for Freddie Gray, Natasha McKenna, Walter Scott, Christian Taylor, for Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Akai Gurley, for Laquan McDonald. We need to vote for Tamir Rice, Yvette Smith, Ayanna Monet Stanley Jones, for Rakia Boyd, for Sharice Francis, for Sean Bell, for Amadou Diallo, for Jason Negron. Their lives and deaths call upon us to vote for criminal justice reform, for an end to militarized policing in our communities, for bail system reform, for an end to bias policing and police brutality. Understand the moment and the opportunity to vote for change. You know, in the Ferguson, in the wake of the murder of Mike Brown, the community rose up. What was televised was their anger. The cameras went away, but the activists never stopped. Since Mr. Brown's death, then President Obama sent the Justice Department to investigate. What resulted was an expose on the Ferguson police abuses and resulting consent decree. Since then, the community has been overseeing the decree. One abuse identified was the way in which misdemeanor arrests were being used to feed a criminal justice system that incarcerated, impoverished, and stigmatized the majority of the population. The community forced change, forced a system to address the number of misdemeanor cases in the system. Since then, over 4,600 of the 9,700 cases at that time pending have been dismissed. The community took an electoral strategy. Ferguson voted out DA Bob McCullough. They voted in a young black man named Wesley Bell as the new DA. And the residents of Ferguson understood the moment and the opportunity. The cameras may have left, but the work never stopped after Mike Brown's demonstrations. Defeat hate and vote. We must vote against weaponizing of police in the black community. We must vote to end the endless stream of Patties, Beckys, and Sues who call 911 on fellow citizens for mowing their lawn, enjoying a cookout, or for swimming in the neighborhood pool. We must vote against policies and prejudices that empower police in ways that they shouldn't, made things criminal that are really issues of fees, fines, and minor violations, and we must re-examine how we use our police. The bigotry we see is seen as un-American by some, but known to be truly American by others. Trump is far more representative of Americans than we may want to believe. And Dyson reminds us that the greatest purveyors of identity politics today in the bulk of our country's history have been white citizens. This means that among the oldest form of fake news is the nation's long trek to democratic opportunity has been the belief that whiteness is identical to the idea of what it means to be American. We must defeat hate and vote. We must vote against ideas that empower white supremacy and racial violence. We must vote against those who hide behind hate speech and hate symbols and resist those who declare that in Charlottesville we find very fine people on both sides. We must vote for those who will aggressively prosecute hate crimes when we see them in violent protests on city streets, town greens, and university dorm rooms. Defeat hate and vote. We must vote against politicians seeking to stack the state, federal, and Supreme Court with justices and judges seeking to turn back the hands of time, reverse the gains made, and undermine our civil rights. We must stand against politicians who confirm these judges. We must move for judicial review and censure and impeachment when they slip through and ascend to the judges' chambers. The appointment process which led to the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh was a joke, a farce, an act to make us believe that a vetting occurred. We must see through these ruses and see who's being put in these positions and why. I see Kavanaugh clearly. He was 2 years ahead of me at Yale. We lived in the same residential college, Yale's version of dorms. Can I say I saw the behavior described? I saw it every weekend at Yale by privileged white males under the influence of alcohol. Did I see him? Who knows? He was not memorable to me, but I saw people who looked like him act that way every weekend. Does this behavior disqualify? You decide, but certainly lying about it should. We must remain vigilant, knowing that our greatest gains are made in the courtroom, and our greatest setbacks will occur there too. Defeat hate and vote. We must vote against those who promote unjust immigration policy, voter suppression, redistricting, and disenfranchisement, knowing that this country was founded upon notions of give me, you're tired, you're poor, and no taxation without representation, and embrace the full political power. We must vote for immigration reform, automatic voter registration upon turning age 18, and automatic restoration of voter rights upon completion of sentencing. Defeat hate and vote. U.S. Representative Joseph Kennedy, the grandson of Robert Kennedy, reminds us that the Trump administration isn't just targeting the laws that protect us, they are targeting the very idea that we are worthy of protection. In the face of such assaultive hate, we must vote for the women's movement, voting for fair pay, pay equity, and an end to sexual harassment, paid family leave, and the protection of women's autonomy over her body. We must vote for quality education, full funding of education services, free college tuition, and more. We must vote since the promise of LeBron's school is the promise of every public school education everywhere. We must vote for an end to poverty, voting not just for a higher minimum wage, but voting for a fair housing wage, a wage enough to cover housing and basic needs in any given area. We must vote for the repayment of the housing debt and education debt owed to every descendant of every person denied an adequate public education and denied housing access due to governmental discriminatory policy. Vote for affordable housing in every community. Vote for housing as a basic human right. Defeat hate and vote. We must vote to reimagine policing, bail, criminal justice, and reentry systems, recognizing, as Jesse Williams reminds us, that police somehow manage to de-escalate, disarm, and not kill white people every day. Knowing that in Charlottesville, the Charlottesville rioters were arrested without incident, that Dylan Roof was arrested without incident, that 177 white bikers who were apprehended after a shootout in Waco, Texas, without incident. That Robert Louis Deere injured 9 people at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado, was taken into custody without incident. That the open carry advocate James Houseman brandished a rifle towards police, was not arrested, and had his rifle returned to him without incident. That in San Diego, Lance Tamayo wielded a 9mm at police in a park where children played and was taken into custody without incident. That 2 men shot up a Walmart in Dayton, Ohio, and were taken into custody without incident. That Julia Shields in Tennessee drove her car and shot at passersby and was arrested without incident. That Derek Daniel Thomas got into a shootout with the New Orleans cops and was arrested without incident. That James Holmes shot up the Aurora, Colorado movie theater, killed 12 and injured 70, and was arrested without incident. Vote knowing that the protections afforded these white citizens are the same protections that every Native, Black, Latino, man, and women deserve as well. Defeat hate and vote. Vote with the knowledge of the power of your vote to determine the laws, the judiciary, taxation policy, immigration policy, reproductive rights, privacy rights, criminal justice, environmental policy, health care, food security, housing, and on and on. Vote like Nelson Mandela with the belief that I am fundamentally an optimist. Vote vote like Dr. King, knowing that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Vote like Angela Davis, knowing that I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change, I am changing the things I cannot accept. Vote with the knowledge of Octavia Butler, who said, choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. And to be led by a liar is to ask to be told lies. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery. Reject hate. Vote. Vote knowing that anti-racism work is the only thing that will heal this country forever. Vote, as Dyson says, believing that America could only purge its hateful bigotry if it confronted its past with the same energy it embraced its founding fathers and celebrated the myth of American individualism. Vote as Baldwin knew that tinkering with public policy was of little use if the value of black life had not been established. Vote to establish the value of black lives and to end white supremacy. Defeat hate, vote. Above all, defeat hate and vote. Keeping your eyes on the prize, continuing to show the world that this community has taken the worst shots possible and found ways to be better than that. We have continuously looked hate in the eye and found ways to be better than that. And so I'll close with this. As a little girl, I grew up watching professional fights with my father, typically a quiet and mild-mannered man. I loved how energized my dad grew when watching the fights. As a child, it was always Muhammad Ali. My dad came alive watching him dance across the boxing ring, delivering powerful knockout punches. He especially enjoyed his post-bout banter, where he would declare that he was the greatest, and he would sing about floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. As I grew, I continued to watch a good fight on my own. I remember the mantle being passed, and I began to watch the fights of Mike Tyson as he knocked out fighter after fighter. There was a fight I remember in 1996 when Tyson and Holyfield fought. Holyfield was the underdog. Tyson was expected to win handily. In the 6th round, Tyson takes an accidental headbutt. He's enraged. He comes out mad, swinging, and he lands some powerful uppercuts. Holyfield actually goes on to win that fight. And in the interview later, he's asked when he knew he'd win the fight. Holyfield says it was then in the 6th round. He'd taken quite a bruising. To others, it didn't look like this was going to be a win for Holyfield. The announcer seemed incredulous. How could he think that he was going to win after taking those blows from Tyson? Holyfield said that he saw that Mike was mad after the headbutt. He came out angry. He gave it his all. And Holyfield said he knew at that moment that all he had to do was be better than that. My friends, that's the story of our experience. White supremacy has taken a headbutt. It has come out mad. It's swinging, and we've seen this before. It's coming at us with all its might, and just like Holyfield, the fighter who won the bout that no one thought he could win, in the face of a flurry of powerful blows, all, my friends, we have to do is be better than that. My friends, be better than that. Defeat hate and vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much for the